Welcome back, Michael Coren, to an hour with Mark Steyn, internationally renowned author and columnist and controversial as some, and merely the mild voice of sanity, probably to the vast majority. You mentioned Malmo, the East End of London. Yeah. It's a very interesting point here, because if women want to cover themselves completely, I find it odd and jarring. I don't approve of it, but they have the right to do that. It's when there are political and social consequences. In Malmo, I think maybe up to half, the fairly small but Jewish population have left the town, the third largest city in Sweden. They're frightened. In Tower Hamlets, which is effectively the East End of London, they've just elected their first direct mayor. This was pushed by Muslim groups to have this form of election, and they've elected a man who is a radical jihadist who defeated other Muslims running for the Labour Party. So the consequences of this sort of dress and this belief, it's not just praying in a certain way, it's believing, it seems, in world dominance, that Jews are an enemy, that Christianity has to be conquered. Very few people are speaking up, and when you do speak up quite moderately about this, you're condemned as being controversial.
No, and you mentioned Jews in the East End of London. That's a very good example. On Holocaust Memorial Day, 2009, a group of Jewish tourists were getting a tour of the old Jewish East End. The police had advised them not to go, which is extraordinary for a start. The Metropolitan Police advised them not to go and tour the East End. They went there, they were pelted with stones and were told they could go no further by, in the current euphemism of Fleet Street, quote, Asian, unquote, youths. Among those injured, requiring a trip to hospital, were an American tourist and a Canadian tourist from Toronto. Astonishing. Jewish visitors on Holocaust Memorial Day being taken to hospital because they'd been pelted with stones in the old Jewish East End. Now, if you go back 70 years, when Oswald Mosley's black shirts tried to march through the Jewish East End, there was a famous riot, Cable Street riot, and a whole alliance of Irish Catholic dockers and other workers joined the Jews to stand firm against the British Union of Fascists and Oswald Mosley. This time round, you know, Jews get stoned in the East End of London, and people say, well, you know, it's a provocation. You know, Jews on Holocaust Memorial Day going round what are now seen as part of the Dar al-Islam, part of the Muslim world, part of Muslim East London. You know, they were looking for trouble. Why didn't they take the advice of the police and just not go there? Same thing in Malmo. I was in Malmo, Sweden a couple of weeks ago. I was sitting around dusk in the old medieval square, and we're talking to a couple of nice Scandinavian blondes, Swedish blondes. I'll miss them when they're extinct. They're awfully cute. And I said I was going to go to Rosengard, which is the big Muslim suburb, and they said it wasn't really safe to go this time of evening, but I said I was going to go anyway. And as I walked about a mile, the gap between the Swedish blondes grew longer and longer, and the gap between fierce, bearded young Muslim men grew shorter and shorter. And then eventually you're in Rosengard, where all the kids kicking the soccer ball around are Muslim kids. All the women are covered from head to toe, far more than in Amman or in Cairo. Far more women are covered in Rosengard, Sweden. Even if they came from Muslim countries where women don't go covered, when they move to Sweden, they have to adopt the head-to-toe covering. That's the insanity of what the multicultural state does. In other words, a moderate Muslim emigrates from a moderate Muslim part of the world to Sweden, and is in effect submerged within radical Islam, because they're the enforcers in a place like Malmo. So the Swedish, modern Western multiculturalism is in a sense just facilitating Islamic triumphalism in that way. And Malmo's not untypical in that.
Let's discuss the UK a little bit more, because obviously I know that country the best outside of Canada. Multiculturalism, to a degree, has worked. We think of the Hindu population, which is overwhelmingly middle class, tiny, almost non-existent prison population. Sikh will be the same, Jewish, Irish Catholic. Now, maybe those communities predated multiculturalism, but when South Asians came to the UK in the 50s and 60s, People didn't single out Muslims for criticism. In fact, they were probably treated better than others. Sikhs had it worse because of the turban. Today, only a complete lunatic racist in Britain would say Sikhs and Hindus, they're a problem. No, they're an asset to the country, as many Muslims are. But the one community where there are problems, both of violence, of prison population, of extremism, that's simply the Muslim population. We have to always say this. That does not mean all Muslims. Many of their victims, of course, are Muslims. But is it something particular to Islam at this stage? Is it something that is unique within Islam of all time? Is it about the religion, about the current interpretation of it?
Well, I think you're right in your general characterization of a British approach to nationality. I mean, we forget that in both the First World War and the Second World War, for example, the majority of British troops who fought under the Union flag and saved civilization twice over were actually non-white people, because when you add in the colonial and imperial troops of King George VI, the overwhelming number of people fighting for king and country in the Second World War were not white. That's simply a fact. And so Britain never had a narrow definition of nationality. But the reality is that when a Pakistani emigrates to Scotland in 1950, he's far easier to assimilate. A Pakistani of 1950 is far more in common with a Scotsman of 1950 than a Pakistani of 2010 who's been educated in a madrasa does when he moves to Scotland now. And so it's not so much that the immigrants have changed, but that Britain has changed. And if you look at Yorkshire, where in the city of Bradford, for example, 75% of Muslims in the city of Bradford are married to their first cousins. Now, if you take the most bigoted white racists of the late 60s, if you take the supporters of Enoch Powell, Enoch, in his famous Rivers of Blood speech, warning against the dangers of immigration, wouldn't have stood up and said, in the early 21st century, 75% of the majority of children in a Bradford elementary school will be the children of first cousins, because people would have thought he was barking mad if he'd even posited such a scenario in the late 1960s. But it happened because, in effect, instead of immigrants from Mirpur assimilating with Yorkshire, Yorkshire has assimilated with Mirpur. The challenge with Muslim immigration is that it's not like other forms of immigration where a Greek may emigrate to Toronto and then marry a Filipino, say. That's fairly common. In Islam has a preference, once its numbers reach a certain size, for a degree of self-segregation. We can argue about the degree, but there's no doubt, wherever you look around the world, that degree of self-segregation is increasing. And the only way you moderate that is if we have the so-called host society is confident enough to have an alternative identity to offer to people, and modern Britain and modern Canada and modern Europe do not. That's what do you assimilate with in Britain? What do you assimilate with in Canada? I mean, you look at these, as crazy as the Cadder family is, as vile and disgusting and murderous as old man Pop Cadder and half his crazy sons are, a whole lot crazier are those pasty, white-faced, white-bread Canadian liberals who've made this family some kind of poster boy just because George W. Bush happened to pick on him. Would you really want, when we say we need immigrants to assimilate, would you really want immigrants to assimilate with the kind of crazy Canadians who venerate the Carter family? No, you wouldn't. Who's the bigger problem? I mean, would you want to assimilate with a decadent, decayed, debauched elite that thinks Omar Khadr is a poster boy for any kind of injustice?
Before I get to the Khadr family and what you said about the white chattering classes, and I think that's actually central to this, people may argue, well, no one has to assimilate. They have to obey the law. They have to respect the country to a certain degree. They may want to change it, but in a non-violent manner. They may say the Jewish community didn't intermarry for the longest time, does now to a far greater extent, but often insists on conversion, even a nominal conversion. There's nothing wrong, surely, in saying we want our religion to continue.
No, I think that's true, and the conversion is an interesting point. As you know, Tony Blair's sister-in-law announced her conversion to Islam the other day.
While she was in Iran, by the way, she was inspired by Iranian freedoms.
Yes, that's right.
But she is mad.
I know she is mad, but you know, so are an awful lot of other people, and I think Islam will be the Richard Gere Buddhism of the early 21st century in that sense. I think there will be a lot of takers for people who think you can have a sort of chic, superficial Islam light. You know, initially it starts with the in-laws of celebrities, like Tony Blair's sister-in-law, but eventually it will be the minor celebrities and then the major celebrities themselves. So I think, you know, I think in that sense there is an element of conversion. But when you say, for example, oh, we have to get immigrants have to recognize the law. That's asking nothing of anybody. You emigrated to this country from the United Kingdom, so you're used to driving on the left. If you'd driven on the left down the 401, your stay in Canada would have been a very short one. So to require, because the law requires you to drive on the right. So simply to say, oh, there will be no problem if immigrants obey the law, that's nothing. Of course people have to obey the law. That's why it's the law. That's why it's the law. That's to ask nothing other of anybody. It's to ask nothing of the far more profound identification people feel when they're voluntarily joining a society. And if you don't ask that, then in the end they won't even obey the law, because what will be fascinating to me will be to see the first human rights complaint filed by a mosque against the gay bathhouse across the street. When that happens, when that case comes before the Ontario Human Rights Commission in Toronto, and these judges who have no problem whacking me around suddenly have to choose between two fashionable identity groups, we will see, as we've already begun to see, that the law bends to who is willing to apply the most muscle, and radical Islam is willing to apply the most muscle.
More of that when we come back in a few moments on the Michael Coren Show with Mark Steyn. We'll see you very, very soon.